So I'm at Mount Olivet Cemetery here in Battle Creek, Michigan. I've filmed at this cemetery before and I did another video at one point. But I decided to come back here and do some more research, and in my research I found some amazing history about one particular family that many of their members are buried here. And in just digging through the research of the family and trying to tell their story, I just became so fascinated I decided to make a very special video on this very specific family because there was a lot of tragedy in this family, but there's also a lot of interesting background with the railroad and police department history within their ranks. So come along and join me, and I will take you through this story here at Mount Olivet Cemetery. Before I begin, I wanted to tell you that my book, Victorian Southwest Michigan True Crime, is now available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and wherever books are sold. You can also go to michaeldelaware.com and order a book there, and I will send you a personally signed copy. The collection of stories contains 17 true crime stories that happened during the 1800s in the Southwest Michigan area. And you can also find a calendar on my website at michaeldelaware.com that shows where my upcoming speaking engagements are. So if you're interested in meeting me in person and hearing some stories from the book, check out the calendar. Now on with today's story about the Lawler family. Carter Michael Lawler came from Ireland, settling in a home near Verona, just northeast of Battle Creek in 1856. He went by his middle name Michael, and he resided at 768 Maple Street. He would remain in that home for 55 years. For many years, he was a cobbler, bringing his trade with him from his home country, servicing the footwear needs of the new community. Michael had married Ann Welch prior to his move to America, and together they had 4 children: Simon, John, Mary, and Elizabeth. Anne, like Michael, was a well-respected member of the Battle Creek community, and together they were active parishioners at the St. Philip's Catholic Church. Anne would pass away sadly in 1903 at the age of 73, following a battle with pneumonia. Michael passed away at age 86 in 1911 from what was described as general debility. Their oldest son was Simon Daniel Lawler, but most people knew him as Sam. He was born February 2nd, 1859, and he grew up on Maple Street, and as a young boy, he began working with the Grand Trunk Railroad as a call boy. His job was to go to the homes of the sleeping engineers and other railroad workers and knock on their doors to wake them up to call them to work. Over the years with the Grand Trunk Railroad, he worked his way up to becoming an engineer himself. He retired from the railroad to enter the dray business. In the 1900s, the dray business was a delivery service by horse-drawn carts or side carts, which would receive goods at a shipping port or railroad station and deliver them a short distance in town to a buyer. Dray carts or sleds were often designed to carry heavy loads such as beer barrels or large bags of grain or other such materials, and they had low sides. He would remain in that business only a short time until 1906, and at the age of 47, he joined the Battle Creek Police Department during a time when it was still the horse and buggy era in the city under Police Chief William Farrington. As a patrolman in the city, he was a familiar face. He worked for the police department for 26 years and was considered by most citizens to be the best-known police officer in the area at the time. During his time with the police department, he saved many lives and was fondly remembered as the Irish philosopher around the police headquarters with his wit and wisdom. In 1932, the Battle Creek City Commission discharged Simon Lawler along with 4 other police veterans: Captain Donald McDonald, Sergeant Andrew Cronin, Patrolman Harry Davis, and Police Matron Edith Dolan, stating they had outlived their usefulness to the department. Their discharges came at a time before the city started paying pensions to its retired policemen and firemen, and so this decision came down suddenly and was a profound shock to these veteran officers. Patrolman Lawler led a fight and protest against these discharges. First, he fought for the benefits of the Battle Creek Police Relief Association, and later for a pension. Leading the group of discharged officers, he carried the fight all the way to the district court, but they lost to a decision carried down by Judge Blaine Hatch in 1933. Simon married Catherine Purcell on October 28, 1884, and together they had 9 children, 4 sons and 5 daughters. His sons were Frank, Harry, William, and Percy. His daughters were Betty, Florence, Rosemarie, Pauline, and Winifred. His wife Catherine passed away in 1934, 1 year after the final court decision in his long battle over pensions. The extreme tragedy in this family was that Simon would see all 4 of their sons and 1 daughter buried in his lifetime. Winifred Lawler was born in 1898, and at just 9 years old, she would die from an illness in 1907. Harry Lawler, the second oldest son, like his brothers and sisters, grew up in Battle Creek. After high school, like his father, he worked for the Grand Trunk Railroad. He would eventually become an engineer, and in 1914, he made a career change and began working with a lumber company out in Oregon. In 1917, he went off to serve in the Great War in Europe, and upon his return, he continued with the lumber business out west. In December of 1919, he was working near Astoria, Oregon, with a logging company, and he was killed in a log slide off of a railroad car. His body was returned to Battle Creek, and he was buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. The story of William Lawler, the third oldest son, is perhaps the most interesting and yet saddest tale in the family history. During World War I, known as the Great War, he served in the Navy as a wireless operator. Always athletic as a young man, it was during his time in the Navy that he became active in boxing. In May of 1920, he won his first out-of-town boxing match against his opponent, Chief Gatcher, an experienced Native American fighter, in a 10-round bout. Becoming known locally as Sailor Bill Lawler in the welterweight category, in June of that year, he defeated veteran boxer Joe Burton in a match in Jackson, Michigan, in an 8-round semifinal. He later fought an Englishman named Billy Holmes in Kalamazoo and was defeated in a decision but prevailed over him in a rematch in Marshall in January 1921. The two would fight each other a third time in Grand Rapids a week later, where Lawler defeated Holmes again. Following this, William was considered a top aspirant for the Michigan welterweight title. He next faced Mickey Brennan in a match in Muskegon, where he prevailed again, and he was then booked to fight Newt McCaslin in a fight in Lansing. This opponent, the newspapers compared the two fighters to have the same free and open style of boxing, and thus were equally matched. The outcome of this match was that it was declared a draw, with neither fighter being declared the victor. William continued fighting through 1921 around the state, many times revisiting previous opponents like Chief Gatcher and Mickey Brennan, and finally had his first bout in Detroit in a match with Phil Gusmano in 1922. He would go on to defeat the less experienced boxer and continue fighting around the state through 1922, facing opponents like Red Curry in Kalamazoo, and later fighting soldiers in a match at Camp Custer. Sailor Bill Lawler was a favorite of Battle Creek fans during those years, and he would eventually put his boxing career behind him and become a young detective at the Battle Creek Police Department, following in his father's footsteps. He married Nora Ann O'Connell and was considered a talented upcoming police officer in the department, and was widely liked for having a keen sense of humor. He loved Nora Ann above all others in his life, and in 1929, he was by her side when she became seriously ill and taken to Nichols Hospital. The doctors informed him she needed immediate surgery or she would die. Bill was reluctant at first to concede to the risky procedure, but he consented when the doctors told him, "It's the only chance, Bill. We have got to operate. It is do or die." She went into surgery and passed away away at 2:30 p.m. on December 31st. Devastated, Bill went home to his house on Division Street to pick out a dress for Nora to be buried in. He lay it carefully out for her to be found, and then sat down and wrote out a note and placed it in his own front pocket. He then took out a revolver and shot himself in the head. It was 4:15 p.m. in the afternoon. The note in his pocket was written to his father, and it said, "I want you to have everything, look after things, forgive me, Bill." Bill and Nora are not buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery, but are buried side by side at Memorial Park Cemetery in Battle Creek. Joseph Percy Lawler, the youngest son, otherwise known as Percy, had grown up in Battle Creek. He was born in the family home on Division Street, and after he left high school, he also worked as a call boy for the Grand Trunk Railroad like his father, and later as a gasoline station attendant. He then got a job driving trucks between Michigan and California, and in July of 1935, he'd been in an automobile accident out in California and spent 3 months recovering in a hospital out there. In October 1935, Percy had just returned home to Battle Creek when, within a few days, he was struck and killed by a Grand Trunk passenger train not far from the train station, about 100 yards from the home that he was born. Initially, the family didn't know it was Percy who had been killed. Simon noticed that Percy had not come home, and seeing that there was an unidentified man mentioned having been killed in a newspaper article. The man was said to be carrying a handkerchief with the initials J and L on it. He visited the Shaw Funeral Home and was able to identify his son. Initially, rumors abounded that Percy had killed himself by stepping in front of the train, but after an investigation, it was ruled an accident. Percy is buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in the family plot. 2 years later, Frank Lawler, the last son of the family, would pass away following a bout with pneumonia in February of 1937. He too had worked in the Grand Trunk Railroad and was well known in those circles. He had been an employee for 28 years with the railroad. Like his father and brothers, he had begun his service there as a call boy, and the last 15 years he'd been an engineer. He's also buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery in the family plot. Sam Lawler passed away in 1945 at the age of 86, and he's buried at Mount Olivet Cemetery. He was survived by his 3 daughters, Rose Marie, who died in 1951 at the age of 64, and she's buried at Memorial Park. Helen, who died in 1952 at the age of 54, and she is buried at Memorial Park as well. And Florence, who died in 1953 at age 57, and she's buried down in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And Betty, who died in 1967 at the age of 72 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. That concludes the story of the Lawler family, filled with tragedy, which connects both Mount Olivet Cemetery and Memorial Park Cemetery in Battle Creek. That's going to conclude today's journey through history. Be sure to get my book on either Amazon or through my website at michaeldelaware.com. It is called Victorian Southwest Michigan True Crime. And check out my calendar on my website for upcoming speaking engagements that I will be at. And I hope that you will check out my podcast, Tales of Southwest Michigan's Past. And if you enjoyed today's video, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.